Pushkin.
Corinne Bailey Rae is an English singer-songwriter whose career started with a bang. In 2006, her debut album topped UK charts and was certified triple platinum with the help of her first hit single, Put Your Records On. A slew of awards and other Best New Artist distinctions followed. As she put out subsequent albums, Corinne aspired to stretch herself as an artist beyond neo-soul pop music success. In September, Corinne Bailey Rae released her fourth album, Black Rainbows. It's an album inspired by her time spent exploring Chicago's historic Stony Island Arts Bank, a vast collection of Black cultural relics and writing. Corinne's new album is in many ways a reaction to the art she consumed in that archive. It's performed in a mix of jazz, rock, and the avant-garde. On today's episode, I talked to Corinne Bailey Rae about the years she spent in the Arts Bank archives and the stories that inspired her new work. She also talked about her record label's exhaustive efforts to push her to recreate the success of her first album, and how a skateboarding magazine helped clarify the look of her new record. This is Broken Record, liner notes for the digital age. I'm Justin Richmond. Here's my conversation with Corinne Bailey Rae.
Your record, I listened to it again. I just went for a walk to go get some coffee and listened to it again. Like, it is really surprising how many different sounds are on here. Like, I loved that I never settled into like a groove listening to it. It was it's like with each song, it's like it's kind of growing, evolving, changing. It's awesome. It's incredible.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I wanted to have all these different styles, but it really came about naturally from responding to the objects, responding to the events. The idea that came seemed to be in a particular style, whether it was, a punk song, or whether it's more aggressive guitars, or whether it's more like a ballad or something more psychedelic. Like it all just kind of presenting itself to me like that. But yeah, it is, it bounces you around a lot.
What were the first handful of songs that you came up with for the record? 'Cause I'm just curious how, how it started and how it evolved sonically.
I think the first handful of songs were, I wrote some in the residency. I went to the Arts Bank. Once I'd encountered the Arts Bank building, Stony Island Arts Bank in Chicago. You can see pictures of it online. It's the foundation that runs it is called the Rebuild Foundation. It's on the south side of Chicago, which I don't know how much you know about the south side, but it was a very vibrant middle-class Black area in the 60s, and then it's just had so much decline and unfunding, and now it's really, there's a lot of difficult issues there with housing, mental health, drugs, violence. But there's this one building there on Stony Island that hasn't been pulled down by the city. The city wanted to pull it down, and Theaster Gates saved it. He bought it for $1 and raised $4 million by selling his own art to make this a building again. So instead of being full of money, it's full of art. It's full of art artifacts. It's full of 26,000 books that were submitted to the Johnson Foundation, who did Ebony magazine and Jet magazine.
Wow,
so all the
cool,
books,
amazing.
exactly. So all the books that were submitted to them over the years for review, as well as the books that John Johnson and the Johnsons collected. And then it has all of Frankie Knuckles' records. So it's got this big slice of, Chicago house music. And it has all the glass slides from the University of Chicago. So when they digitized their archive, they just gave all this a bang. They had nowhere to store it all. And it also has all these difficult objects that were pulled out of circulation by a Black and Chinese banker called Ed Williams. Problematic objects from America's past, the trinkets and the mammy jars and newspaper articles, photographs, cartoons, all of these things that he would find in flea markets and yard sales that he wanted to just buy and put in a box in his house so nobody else was buying them, and putting them in their house and keeping it all going. So he had these boxes and boxes of things, and they became too much even for him to be around. 16,000 objects. So they are also all in the bank as well. So I went looking around just as a tourist, as someone who's interested in history and Black histories and stories and hidden stories, erased stories. And when I left, I just couldn't help but, I was just scribbling a poem here or starting to write a song here. And I spoke to Theaster about it, and he said, you should come back, be an artist in residence. They have buildings nearby. So we stayed there for 2 weeks, and just really dug into the archive, read loads of books, saw loads of objects, attended loads of events. And then I've just been going back there very regularly all through these years, since 2017. So, I mean, the first song I ever wrote about the bank was called You Who Walk These Floors in Fear, because I had seen a sculpture that was made from the abandoned floorboards from a police station. The police station had been left for many decades, and these floorboards were from there. And I thought about what they had been witness to, how often in history it's the witnesses are silent, they're the buildings, they're the windows, they're the trees, the soil, the slave cabin, the things that can't talk, but they've seen a truth.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing I wrote. That's kind of on, I guess, a part 2 of the record, which I haven't finished. But then I wrote He Will Follow You With His Eyes and Erasure, and then maybe Before the Throne of the Invisible God. It just kind of, started from there.
He Will Follow You With His Eyes is certainly like a dance element to it. So maybe that's the Frankie Knuckles Chicago house of it all. How did you write that song? Like, did it start off with words? Were you at a piano, guitar?
With He Will Follow You With His Eyes, I had seen all this advertising, and I'd found a tin of a beauty product when I was in Chicago. I'd opened the drawers of the stone in the Ed Williams collection and seen this tin, and it had this beautiful illustration on, and it was this company called Valmore. So then when I was home, I was doing all this research about Valmore and finding out they were kind of like the Avon of their day. So they would sell these beauty products door to door. The guy who did the art for them, they all had these amazing illustrations on line drawings, and it was this black artist called Charles Dawson. So they had very sympathetic drawings, that the line was targeted at black men and women, and it was targeted in this really romantic way. Whoever did the marketing was really good. So the perfumes would be called things like Follow Me Boy or Look Me Over. And then when you'd read something in, Ebony or another publication about Valmore, and it would have all the products listed, it would say in a big banner across the top, his eyes will follow you across the room, and it would be it'd be a series of wigs or something that they were selling. So they sold all kinds of things. And I thought about Valmore and just how enticing it was. Sometimes I'd read about the hair products and think, I wonder if you could still get this, because it sounded like from the description that it did everything. It's like it nourishes, but it's not greasy, and it does it's a styling product, and it's a pomade, and I thought, gosh, they were so good. Their marketing was really good, and obviously it was a sympathetic view of black men and women, but it was very much aligned with white beauty. So the beauty they were aiming at was, lighter skin, straighter hair, all of these things. So I guess with the song, I wanted to present a kind of 1950s dream world where you're really under the spell of this kind of advertising. You can imagine them knocking at the door, and if you're a black woman, you're going to be taking the hair straightening cream, and you're going to be taking the skin lightening cream and all of those things. But halfway through the song, the person who has been very much under the spell of Valmore, there's this sonic disruption, and then they end up saying, I don't want to vanish into a girl that I don't recognize. If you want to run to Sweet Georgia Brown was another kind of skin lightening cream, light brown is the thing, not dark.
Soon after that line, it's like a break in the song.
Yeah, it's a total
really
break,
cool
and
way.
the person everything just falls away, and it gets much more contemporary, and it's just I'll be there with my plum red lipstick, my black hair kinky, my black skin gleaming. I wanted it to be a sort of a shock and kind of really assertive, and that the person would be sort of back in their self and away from this really enticing beauty which held many people under its sway for a really long time.
The repetition of those lines make it really feel like a call to arm as much as like a refrain, and it's beautiful. And like the way it just repeats and repeats and repeats, and the production evolves over that second half of the song. It's like it feels subversive in a very cool way.
Thank you.
As you were writing out the words, did you know at that point the song should move into something else?
Yeah, I wanted it to be a shift away from, in the beginning we had vibraphones and guitars and we had strings, and it was all very dreamy. I was imagining like, those probably Californian movies that were shot, where a car would be sort of winding round the roads, wrapping a mountainside and the sun shining, that kind of 50s dream world. And you can live in it, but at some point you have to, when you break out of it, you realise how all-consuming it was. And so, yeah, I really wanted to have that repetition. But I wrote it on guitar, so I would always just be like pulling one string. Plum, red, lipstick, my black hair. And then I guess when we did it in the studio, we just, we wanted it to evolve. Like, don't bring the bass straight away and have these more like cosmic sort of weird jazz moments. It's like, is it futuristic? Is it 70s? It's, but we wanted it to be, we wanted it to be different to what had gone before.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's really cool. And the tone of the beginning does sort of remind me of like the late 50s, like early 60s, almost like it's akin to like a Frankie Valli production or something. But then yet again, just like everything else on the record, it's like halfway through, it's like, oh shit, we're onto something else now,
I really liked it. And I thought, some people are saying it's close to what your sound has been historically. So I really liked that idea that you might put it on and be like, oh, finally, I can just kind of relax in this, but then you listen to words. What is she saying? She's saying lighter and brighter. Why is she saying longer and straighter? And, it's kind of, I feel like the I in that song is not really me. It's kind of this, I don't know, Shirley Bassey type Eartha Kitt, delivery. I'm being, everything, I was being more dramatic than I would normally sing it. I was trying to sort of be in that world.
I'm so happy to hear a Shirley Bassey reference. I mean, like, she's incredible, and no one talks about her anymore. She's and same with Eartha Kitt, like, just uniquely bizarre but beautiful voice.
Yeah, I love that.
But I didn't want to say that, but that was my response listening to the albums when it got to that song. I was like, oh, okay, something that it's not that like I pigeonhole you in my mind, but by the time I got that song, I was like, oh, this feels like familiar terrain, familiar territory.
Yeah, and it was, and that's writing it in this sort of bossa nova guitar style. It's like I write a lot of songs from there, so yeah.
I love that there's like it's not like you rap on it, but there's some tracks like New York Transit Queen, really, where it sounds almost like similar to the way ESG, like kind of like, it was like they weren't rapping, but they were like aggressively talking on the track, but also rhythmically. It was
that's very cool.
Super cool.
It's a really cool reference because I did find an ESG record amongst Frankie Knuckles stuff as well, Frankie Knuckles archive.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's like, oh, this band are so cool. I don't know enough about them, I don't know enough about them. But yeah, I really want to use my voice in all these different ways on the record. I mean, I think it was a side project. So I didn't feel any sort of beholding to the music that I've done before. And I thought, it doesn't matter if it's really different to what I've done. In fact, it should be really different to what I've done because it's a side project. It's not me. It's like, I was calling it was like the Chicago project. It was for ages. It was just that. And first it was going to be an EP and then it turned into more. But it was only really towards the end of it that I thought, oh, I really should claim this as my own. It has been my obsession for the last 7 years. And I want it to be my record now. But it's only really when I saw my name on it. We worked with this brilliant graph artist called Manu Shribley, who's an art designer, and I'd seen his writing on a skateboard magazine and then just kept calling him like, please, can you do this? It just has to be you. But I realised I hadn't told him, don't put my name on. So I told him, here's some photos and it's called Black Rainbows. But I hadn't quite explained, it's not really my project, it's a side. So when I saw my name written down, I was like, I forgot to tell him not to put it on. But then when I saw it and even the way he'd written it made me reimagine myself. It was really weird. But just something about the way he's done that script, just being free from all the different fonts that I feel like I've tried as sort of logos of my own name. And then suddenly there was just this free writing. And I thought, I really like how that looks. I like how that is.
Do you typically look through skate magazines, or was that
it was
a
just
fluke?
It was a real fluke. It was just the way they had it presented. I think I've probably got it here, the one I saw.
Oh, cool.
So it's like, who's this elegant sort of black teenager on the front, and then this writing. I mean, so I couldn't even work out what it was called at the time.
Yeah,
so
I was going to say, what is that called?
I think that's this Renaissance issue, but the magazine's called Numbered. But I really, really like magazine shopping, and there's a shop called Colours May Vary in Leeds that I go to, but there's also this store that's it has like a Carhartt downstairs and loads of skating, but it's got magazines upstairs, and it's everything from punk zines, like rad trans, bi, queer publications and then just art house stuff and fashion stuff. And so I always think magazines are really special. I mean, I know you can get loads online now, but just seeing how someone's put all the work into it and putting it together, and it costs money to make all these shoots. So I was thinking, like, you can pay your £7 or £12 or whatever it is, and I don't know, I'm still really analog, so I love coming home from town with just like 10 magazines, and then you get to see like, oh, who was the art director, who was the so I really like to do that. And I like to read in the bath, so it's just, you can't really do that with your phone. Just, you end up destroying your phone. I've done it before.
I have, I do.
Why did I do that?
It's less fun.
Dumb. Yeah,
it's way less fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like at some point people will realize, just like with vinyl, that it's like, it's much more fun. You could scroll Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or whatever, but it's way less fun.
It's way less fun. But also there's a limit to it, which is good, whereas, you never get to the back page of the internet. And so your brain is... I've got this completist thing sometimes when I'm on Instagram, and then I'll look up and hours have gone past and I think, I'm trying to just get to the end, and there will be no end. Whereas with a magazine, when you've done the whole thing,
yeah. It's nice. It's like kind of like a sad thing because you got to wait for the next issue, but it's like it's healthy. It's a healthy.
It's
you
like,
gotta
okay, now go and eat some food or like go outside for a walk. It's like that dead-eyed scrolling thing that you can get to it like just before you go to bed. It's so bad. I've really try not to do it now.
We're going to pause for a quick break and then come back with more of my conversation with Corinne Bailey Rae. We're back with Corinne Bailey Rae.
So you weren't thinking of it as a side project, just as a way to trick yourself into being a bit more outside of your comfort zone in music making. You were legitimately thinking about this as something that would not have your name on it.
It wouldn't have my name on it. And then I thought, I'd like, people could be pleasantly surprised if they found out that it was me. But I think because as soon as I thought of it as a side project, then I just felt completely free. I'm not doing it for a label. It doesn't have to have radio songs. It doesn't have to have 3-minute songs. They don't have to be catchy. They don't have to have a traditional form. Like some of them don't have a second verse, or some of them have no choruses, or some of them have, 8 verses or whatever it is. I just wanted to make, and I wanted it to be kind of messy. And I felt all the time really excited that, I think before I would have had a song like Before the Throne of the Invisible God, and then thought, okay, what else can it do? Maybe I should put in a middle 8, or maybe now I've got to get it smaller, now I've got to get it shorter. Could we change the beat? And I just...
Where does that come from in you?
I think it's just for years of being a label, where you're interacting with people. I mean, when I did my first album, it wasn't without any A&R at all, because we had this really good DJ called Gary Davis who would I was working in a production company with him. But pretty much we did it amongst ourselves. It was me and Steve Chrysanthou underneath this art shop in a sort of place out of town near Leeds in Yorkshire. And then we could take it to the labels and say, here we are. It's whatever it was, 12 songs. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Some of them loved it. Some of them didn't get it. And then we interviewed, and then we found our home at EMI at that time.
Well, then it sounds like it was sort of you more than the label, right? Because it's like, the first album is very tight, sort of pop, not in the vacuous sense, but it's very tight songwriting,
It's a more sort of pop record, and I think, but yeah, definitely Gary was an influence on that. It was more like I wrote tons of songs, and they were the songs that people were saying, oh, it should be this one, it should be that one. I had a manager at the time. I was young. I was like, oh yeah, this one, not that one, this one, not that one. I'd already written Like a Star when I was in my band. And of course, I did want to connect with people. I wanted to make it work. I wanted people to hear it,
Wanted it to be received in a way that was,
I wanted it to be received. It's like I was, I had my English literature degree, but I was working in a cafe and working in a jewellery counter and, going down to London when I could to write these songs with people. And I really wanted to sort of make it, I wanted music to be the thing that I did. So I worked really hard on that record, and it went through a lot of people's hands in terms of maybe my manager saying yes or no, or Gary Davis saying yes or no, and then obviously various labels eventually saying yes. But I think from then on, because it was so popular, I then felt a real pressure with, certainly my third album, to try and somehow recreate what I had already done, but I knew I didn't want to because it didn't feel creatively good to do. But yeah, I'd had so many meetings where I'd be really excited about a song, we'd work on it and then we'd send it down to whoever was the A&R or the label at the time. Would be just like, oh, I'm waiting to hear back. I wonder what they think. And then you'd get a sort of response and it'd be like, yeah, it's good. It doesn't sound like the first single. There was always this thing about what's the first single. The first single has to smash the doors down. The first single has to be so catchy. The first single has to be radio friendly. The first single has to be this. It's unique. It's different. It's you. People are basically saying, oh, it needs to be what Put Your Records On did. But of course, that was such a different moment, and it was kind of felt like an accident to me. It was just like, this is a weird song, a little song that I love, and it wasn't like anything else. It was just accidental that it was successful. So then I always, I'd always feel that pressure, and I'd put what I thought was a good offering forward, and the response was always like, not quite like, are you crazy? This isn't it, but not that far off it, just kind of like...
Yeah.
Bit of sideways look. And then it'd be, I wrote Like a Star on My Own when I was, a teenager, but there would be a sort of like, oh, maybe we could pair you with this person or that person. So I ended up doing lots of co-writing, which is always weird, where it's like, hi, we don't know each other, we've got 5 hours, let's make a smash hit. But the person would always be like a giant in music, so then it's even more intimidating. You're like, if this isn't working out, it's me, not them. And so I just think it sort of crushed my confidence a lot, and it kind of dinted my radar or my instinct for what was right for me, I guess, so I just keep trying.
Was that starting with the second record?
I mean, the second record was different because it was kind of a reaction to my first album. So I wanted to play more guitars and have it more indie because my first record was so much more of a pop soul record.
It felt like an evolution. It felt related to your first record, but it felt like a step forward.
Yeah, thanks. And I loved it. And I guess I had got more into jazz and into soul, but I also had all my indie stuff. But I think in terms of politically at the label, I had gone through a big loss at that time. My first husband had died really unexpectedly. And so everyone at the label was very kind and understanding, and no one pushed me at that time. So I felt like the first record I got to do what I want. The second record I'd kind of got to do what I want because nobody wanted to upset me, or they just were happy that I was making something. And genuinely, they were good people. They cared a lot for me. My one A&R person who I still really love, he's a friend. He came up to see me like every 2 weeks with fancy cakes from London, and we just sat and talked about nothing. And it was a really beautiful time, actually. And then he'd occasionally play me like, hey, there's this bonkers Lady Gaga and Beyonce song, or have you seen this? Or like he would kind of tell me what's happening in the world because I was very much in my own sort of bubble. So in a way, I think by the third record, there was a lot of pressure because they had wanted to do more with the second record, but they couldn't because I was in this delicate place. So the third record was like, right, we've really got to make this count, And that was the rhetoric around me. It's like, yeah, this is the one, just don't throw it away, that kind of feeling of like,
Got it, yeah.
And it's because of that, I just felt this immense pressure. I feel like I wrote 3 albums where I could have written one for that. And it was just, what about this? No. What about this? Not the first single. What about this? Don't really hear it. I don't really get that one. And then after a while, I didn't need to go to present it to them. I could just hear the voice in my head saying, don't bother finishing that. It's not an international mega smash, And that, I was like, yeah, it's really rough. I sort of look back on that time and feel really sorry for the me that was that person. And I look at the Heart Speaks and Whispers and think, wow, I'm really glad. I'm glad that I got as much done as I did. And I'm glad that there are some good songs on that record. But it was really hard to work from an instinctive place, even though the record was about following your instincts. It's called The Heart Speaks and Whispers. But those whispers were very easily sort of drowned out by other people and by myself, probably. So with this record, I knew I wasn't at a label. I didn't think it would take as long as it did, but I was like, I am just going to do something completely different to anything I've done before. Like, I'm not going to feel those pressures. I'm not going to think about radio. I'm not going to think about what I've done before because it's not even my name. And because of that, there was just this torrent of creativity. And not just that, because I was working within this archive, the labour was like sitting reading a bunch of Ebony magazines, you know, or like going to an amazing exhibition in New York, Soul of a Nation, or flying to Milan to see Betty Saar's retrospective, you know, at the Prada Foundation.
Yeah.
I didn't think of it as work, and it wasn't work. That was me just sort of following my muse. But all of those rich things that you're all fed into the record. So it was really fun to do. And the right way to do stuff, I guess, is just to wait until you're really excited and then just let it fly out.
How did you end up in Chicago, that first trip where you visited?
I was on tour.
Stony Island?
I was on tour with the Heart Speaks in Whispers. So we had done, you know, we had probably done New York and done, you know, Connecticut or somewhere. And then we'd flown into Chicago. And I remember saying to one of my managers, I'm really annoyed because I really wanted to meet this brilliant artist, Theaster Gates. And I didn't tell you. And now you won't be able to come to the show. Like, I was really fatalistic. And she somehow managed to find him that day. And he did come to the show. I didn't know. And when I was getting changed, she shouted at me, she's like, don't get changed, come out with someone to meet you. And I was so excited to see him. I didn't know he was going to be there. I'd seen photos of him, so I knew it was him. And I was just buzzing to talk to him and be like, you know, you've saved this building from demolition. That's what you do. That's part of your art practice. And you're into ceramics, and I love ceramics. And, you know, he has this background in the Black Church, and he has this band called the Black Monks of Mississippi, and so he's got this music part of what he does as well, and he's lectures at the university, and he's super brainy, and I just was like, you know, really excited to meet another creative person, and because it's art, you know, there's no rivalry. I mean, there'd be no rivalry between the two of us. Fiesta is a literally internationally known, you know, artist whose works sell for, you know, millions. But it was really good to just have a seam that, you know, he had nothing really to do with the music industry, and I, of course, had nothing to do with the art world. And so it was just kind of meeting, getting to know each other as friends.
That's so cool that it's like it all came together and that it inspired this sort of next, like a rediscovery of yourself, too. While we're talking about the first record, I really like the first record. I think it's really good. Yes. But it always seemed like, I remember reading interviews from you at the time, that it seemed like your influences were a bit deeper than that record conveyed, you know, or more varied than that record conveyed. And it's a really great album. Yeah. I mean, it's like a really well done album, but it always did strike me that it's like, oh, there's something else going on though, and there's some undercurrents that aren't being expressed, you know.
I'm really glad you could see that and feel that, and that's how I felt at the time. It was a funny mixture of feeling. I feel really accepted because people have taken this thing that I made in my hometown. I played on my guitar and I wrote, and then here it is in the world. But also, it felt like I was somehow keeping a part of myself secret or hiding a part of myself. And maybe that is that part, you know, it's like the music that didn't necessarily come straight out of Black cultures or the music that I'd grown up listening to, you know, like the indie music. I mean, I know rock has a Black origin as well, but I didn't get to show the part of me that loves electric guitar and loves indie music and this complex simplicity of a band like Nirvana, you know, the simple, direct nature of that kind of music, and or like weird, you know, Björk or Tori Amos or, you know, those. I felt like on the first record I didn't get to show the whole thing. I just felt like I've got more and different things to say, and I, you know, I just want to keep feeling that there's more to say, or else why would you why would you bother saying it?
Yeah. One thing that was cool about the first record that stood out, because it didn't feel like that was a time when it was like there was a lot of kind of milquetoast acoustic music. I don't want to name anyone, but your music felt particularly a little deeper. And I think because it connected to you, like I was thinking about it, like in the States, I guess we have Bill Withers, but beyond Bill Withers, there wasn't a strong tradition of like the soulful singer-songwriter, even though there was great songwriters in soul music. Whereas in the UK, Linda Lewis or Labi Siffredi, like there's these people who could like play guitar acoustically and make records that were essentially soul records. And it kind of felt like that was similar to what you were doing. And that kind of resonated with me, at least, there's like this really great songwriting that it's soulful, but it's just presented in this way that is unique, at least I feel like in the States, So as soon as someone pulls out an acoustic guitar out here, it's a little saccharine,
Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad you said that. And I mean, Bill Withers is, obviously a god in everyone's world, but he is, right at the top of the tree. And I watched that documentary. I don't know if you saw it a few years ago. It came out, Still Bill. That's
one of my favorites.
It's such a good album. But the documentary that came out when he was still alive, and he was talking about this period of his life where people were saying, kind of trying to convince him to change his style. He said there was people at the record label, and he called them the black spurts. And he'd say, he's like, you need to get up off that stool, and you need to get 2 dancers and the gold lame shirt and just start, maybe disco was coming in, and his kind of homely, folksy,
West
style.
Virginia.
Yeah, it just, it was somehow not seen as commercial enough, but also there was an undertone to it's not black enough.
It's not black enough.
Yeah, it's not black enough.
That's always what has struck me about being black in the UK from afar. I've only been to London once, but from afar, it always seemed as if y'all had a little more freedom over there to express layers of yourself, whereas what's black is very, put on the whatever, the lame shirt and
get the
go
dancers.
dance disco. It's like, what?
It's so interesting with African American culture, because obviously black American music is kind of like the pinnacle to me of like creative arts. Partly it comes out of that segregation and separatism. So I know what you mean. It's like, it's a very specific blackness which is very specifically not whiteness.
Yeah.
And in the UK, it's more messy and hybrid because we didn't have legalized segregation. You had the black African people working plantations, but they were in the Caribbean, and that was separate from England, even though they were owned by English white people, Scottish and English.
Separate culture.
Yeah, but then when the Caribbeans came, they, I guess, had already been in a hybrid culture where they were black majority islands, but there were lots of white people there, and, they're influencing each other. And then sort of coming in, but also being influenced by American imports, vinyl imports. And, think of like a Bob Marley and how much he's obviously into Curtis Mayfield and all those harmonies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But he's also doing his own thing with it. So I always think like Caribbean music is sort of hybridized anyway. And then you get this thing in blackness where the people are black, like my dad's family came from the Caribbean, but they also thought of themselves as British because the Caribbeans were a British colony, so they already had their British passport. So it's a really different scene, black Britishness. But I know what you mean. I think it's less defined, it's less strengthened by institutions and the black universities and the NAACP and the black church, and they're all the things that make black American music so great. But I also think the sort of the hybrid messy thing of the UK means that I feel like people feel blackness is less defined. It's not like someone's drawn a chalk circle around you, and if you step out of it you're not authentic, or your blackness is in question. And then of course mine's further complicated because my mum is white, my dad's black, so it's like it's that as well. So I always used to, be playing and think, do I like this because I am not black? Do I like this because and then I would find loads of my black friends would also be feeling or being accused of not being black enough, so you realise that it's a construct. And then, even to this day, my black girlfriends will be like, I'm going to the carnival, West Indian carnival, so like I need these kind of earrings and this kind of clothes to almost present as black. And so it's that thing has really done a number on all of us, where we limit ourselves because we think that there's a certain expectation of blackness. And that was another reason why the record's called Black Rainbows, because I really wanted to push out to say like, oh yeah, this is a punk track, but I'm wearing a Bad Brains t-shirt in the video because Bad Brains is this amazing black punk band, and this dissenting music has also has a black thread and black origins, and they've been kind of written out, not Bad Brains specifically, but those black and ska kind of origins of punk are sometimes not acknowledged,
Well, recently a Bob Seger song came on the radio for me, and I was like, oh, fuck. I was like, no one, I just never listened to Bob Seger. And like something from one of his first records came on. I was like, damn, why did no one tell me how great this is? So I started listening, and I kind of got a little obsessed with like hard rock music, or like the origins of hard rock, like late 60s through the 70s. And so I started making like a playlist, like kind of like what was the stuff that made hard rock. And what I realized as I was listening is a lot of it came from, well, there's a lot that came from London. There's a lot that came from Detroit.
Yeah.
And a lot that came from LA. But a lot of it was out of Detroit, and a lot of it was white guys trying to be soulful, trying to do R&B.
Yeah, yes. I mean, you could say that's the start of the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And there was a big scene in the UK, a kind of northern soul scene, which was definitely, young white bands hearing American imports and wanting to, do them. Or you think of, sort of Patti Smith, quoting a Motown song, or, Tainted Love, being redone by Mark Armand. There was many incidents. And as we were saying earlier, the Beatles themselves picking all these like Little Richard songs to cover, and it's like
Stones and The Who,
Stones,
like all that stuff.
Exactly. Like, yeah. And they all really acknowledge, we love Muddy Waters. But, at the time, the irony of it was that it kind of took white English young kids appreciating black R&B to kind of sell it black white America. They took it as like, it's the British invasion. I was like, you guys should just change the radio channel occasionally. Twist and shout. It's like, listen to the Isley Brothers, or listen to Chuck Berry, or listen to, but for some reason it filtered through that, connected with them for all the different complicated reasons
that had to be that way.
Yeah. But I mean, that relationship between the bouncing back and forth between sort of the UK and the US is something that I'm really, into, and following those threads. I love the music history.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, into your point about like those blues and soul imports that like kind of would find a home in the UK that there was really not much of a home for them in the US. That's another thing about the UK that I've always envied from afar, is it's like it's always been a place for black people to go to feel, except the classic stories like Hendrix going there, or just other various places in Europe where jazz musicians are just going, because it's like, or Tina Turner just moving to Sweden because it's like, this is way better, or Switzerland or Sweden, one of those.
Yeah, just people escaping the particular type of American racism, which one that comes out of that long-standing segregation and just the amount of brainwashing around, we are different, inherently different peoples, all of that racial constructs that's so powerful in America. I think it is nice for black people to come to Europe. I'm not saying it's not a land without racism, but it's different flavour. And but even just the difference makes you realise how subjective and constructed the whole thing is.
Yeah.
We're going to take one last quick break and then come back with more from my conversation with Corinne Bailey Rae. We're back with the rest of my conversation with Corinne Bailey Rae.
Let's talk about Peach Velvet Sky.
Yeah.
You used to work in a jazz club, correct?
Yes, I used to work in a jazz club. So when I was at university, I worked in this jazz and soul club called the Underground. And first I was collecting the coats to hang up. And then I was working behind the bar, which was the really good job because the bar was opposite the stage. So as you were working, you could just be watching all these incredible jazz musicians come through and brilliant bands. I remember Roy Ayers playing there one time, or like Casa Latina All Stars, like lots of, like they would always get Cuban musicians and Terry Callier, you could just kind of watch and learn, as well as lots of, people from the UK.
There's another one. There's another beautiful, soulful singer-songwriter just like out of control,
Yeah, Terry Callier. Yeah. So beautiful. And that sensitivity, I think of John Lucian as well, But Peach Velvet Sky I had written because I saw lots of copies of this one book in the Arts Bank, and it was a book that I had read as a teenager. It's a book that had been sent to me by my American aunts. My dad's got 4 sisters. Everybody came here from St. Kitts, And then two of them moved to New Jersey when they were in their early 20s. And so they were my American aunts, and they would send me, books or stuffed clothes, Kool-Aid sometimes, or like barrettes for my hair. But they, my Aunt Joyce sent me this book, and it was called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. It's part of a six narratives, early African-American narratives. And I read it, and I was just so struck by this woman's story, that she had grown up on this plantation in 1813. She grew up under the authority of her parents, and then as she got a little bit older, she realised she was in this institution, from which there was no escape. There was an authority above her parents that she couldn't, violate at all. And then later on in her life, the ownership of her changed, so that she had this new master who was also the local doctor, but he developed this obsession with her, and he believed himself to be in love with her. So he would be always trying to sort of pursue her and, sort of sexually aggress her. And Harriet Jacobs ended up having 2 children in her teens with a local man, a white man who her grandmother had put her in touch with to see if he could help her. And he obviously, however, I don't know the exact situation of their relationship, and even how she writes it, it seems as though this is a love relationship. But they have 2 children together. And this incenses this doctor even more, this master, and he's violent. At one point he's very violent with one of the children. He throws the boy against the wall, and he's in a coma for days. And she realises she has to get away, and she realises she has to get her children away. So she makes it seem as though she's fled to the north, but in fact she's hiding out in the crawl space above her free grandmother's storehouse on the plantation. It's not big enough to stand up in, but she can crawl, and her grandmother can let her out into the storehouse to move around. She's feeding her, and she waits until the coast is clear, and she waits until he's expended a lot of effort and money and time looking for her in the north. So she stays in this crawl space for 7 years. And while she's there, she bores this hole in the side of the building. It's a wooden building, like this tiny hole, so that people can't see in, but she can see out. So she can look out and see her children playing, because her grandmother brings the children nearby. Or she can hear, passing comments, things that might be pertaining to her freedom. She's got enough light to sew by. And when I saw it in the Arts Bank, I reread it, because I thought, what's this like now to read as an adult, to read as a woman, to read as a mother? And it was just, it's so much a story of waiting and patience and resilience, and just thinking of someone's mental fortitude to be able to make a prison for yourself, in effect, so that when you do eventually escape, you're safe. And you can, she does send for her children, and she ends up setting up a school with her daughter for children leaving slavery in 1865. But I was really drawn to this story. And one time I was trying to get to sleep, and I thought about this loophole that Harriet Jacobs had, and what the sky looked like from her loophole, what the sunset looked like, and how wide and vast it seemed when she eventually found her freedom.
Wow. It's beautiful. And the chords on the song are beautiful. I don't know how it developed into like that sort of what kind of rapturous, gorgeous song that it became. But it's like all the elements of that are just beautiful. And that it's sort of, in terms of production value, the least sort of adventurous, but it's like all the musically it's all there, but it fits in between these 2 songs that are just sort of, you're like, how does it fit? That's the whole kind of thing about this record to me, is like, how the fuck does this song fit to this song? But it's beautiful. It's all gorgeous. I wanted to
make the track order like a sort of, one thing would be a palate cleanse for the other. So just when it was sort of too, overwhelming, then I would want to do something beautiful, but then I want to do something, I just wanted to keep changing the mood, I guess. But yeah, with Peach Velvet Sky, I wrote that on guitar, but it was much more of a simple, folk song. And then when I worked with Steve Brown, who I've worked with for a long time, him also married to, he has a really, really good ear, and he's a jazz musician. So I guess the song kind of developed this extra rich directness and the much more complex harmony because of what he was sort of putting in. And so we would just rehearse it together, and I'd say, come on, we need to record it. And he'd say, it's not, we haven't got it yet. We don't want to record it until it's like we're doing it on stage. And that's how we ended up doing it. So it felt risky to me because I normally like to sort of track things as you go along and then almost say, well, this, it worked and it's down now. But we would just put in lots of rehearsals with that. And
I'm glad you did, because your vocal performance on that is phenomenal. It's like really crazy. It's like,
thank you.
God damn, that's a tough vocal performance. And
thank you.
Like you really nail it.
I really feel with these stories, they're so much bigger than my own personal story. When you think of Harriet Jacobs and surviving this sexual aggression, and then, her parents die and she's a slave girl. And then she's a teenage parent to this man who he says he's going to free her children, but he hasn't done it yet. And he goes on to be this prominent politician. And then she's constantly got this man, and then how to escape it and thinking of doing it. And then that's 7 years this guy can't get round that sort of, she could just scream out in the middle of the night and it would completely blow a cover. It's like, how does she hold on and hold back and kind of slow herself down for that amount of time, but then get into this very active, getting on a boat, going north. I just think of what's kind of gone on in her mind. She's so, to me, the thing of mental health I was really sort of thinking of in the song. And are there any points where she does become sort of maddened and is slightly cracked by just eventually while she's in there, they try and get her home by putting her children in prison. They say, your mother's so unfeeling. How can she not come from the north when she knows you're in prison? And she just is holding this line. It's this huge gamble that she takes. And I'm really fascinated by her. She lived into her 80s, Harriet Jacobs. But
you mentioned earlier there's sort of other songs that you've written for this project that you plan to put out in some way, shape, or form. How far along with that are you?
I think at one point I was working at 20 songs all at the same time, and I thought, this is just crazy because none of them are going to get finished, because I know what I'm like and I always just take too long. So then I just thought, right, just focus on these 10 because they're close to being finished and leave the other 10 for now. So I guess I'll go back to them and revisit them, but they all came around about at the same time as the rest of the songs. So
it'd be beautiful to hear another project related to it.
Wow.
And it's great to hear you talk about this stuff. It's like, it's refreshing to hear someone who's connected to the world through art in the way that you are on this record.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it has really been an obsession. And I say that, there's so much in there. There's so much in that bank. Those 26,000 books and all those stories and all those, you could just look at a newspaper article or someone staring out of a photo or find, a little Stitch handmade black doll. And just, it's like, they're all objects that have come to us through history for, how did they get here, and, what have they observed? And I just find the whole thing really fascinating. And, there are obviously so many of the questions that the objects are asking are still questions and still, hotly debated things now. I think the fact that the history wasn't done was the thing that made me interested in it as well,
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for putting the record out. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much. It's been really great to talk to you.
Thanks to Corinne Bailey Rae for explaining the inspiration for her newest album, Black Rainbows. You can hear it along with our favorite songs from her on a playlist at brokenrecordpodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced and edited by Leah Rose with marketing help from Eric Sandler and Jordan McMillan. Our engineer is Ben Tolliday. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. And if you like this show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.